North Carolina's elected leaders are debating the state's next budget, and if the current one is any indication, much of the spending will be done in the shadows. Representatives, senators, and the governor say the state is only spending $19 billion in the 2009-2010 fiscal year. That's not entirely true. A little sunshine on the books reveals the state actually planned to spend $49 billion. However, elected officials only focus on the 39% of the budget they control. They don't control $14 billion from Washington for things like Medicaid and other expensive social programs or the matching funds the state has to pony up. The governor says $49 billion isn't enough.
The old days are gone. There are not enough public dollars in the system to do all of the things that are priorities to the people of North Carolina, from education to human services to community safety to infrastructure.
The state was able to find $1.3 billion in economic incentives to private companies for this fiscal year. It's also debating more corporate handouts for the 2010-2011 fiscal year.
We balance the state budget every year.
So says Speaker of the House Joe Hackney, except they do it largely by turning again to the federal government. First, in the current fiscal year, the state needed at least $2.2 billion from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, also called the stimulus bill. Politicians plan to spend a little less next fiscal year. North Carolina also borrowed $2.2 billion from the federal government to pay for unemployment benefits. Former Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr points out the state is deep in debt.
The state, even though we're supposed to be running a balanced budget, continues to borrow large sums of money, hundreds of millions. In fact, I think the state debt right now is $6 billion.
The state treasurer confirms North Carolina is $6 billion in debt. What does that mean for our political class? Dr. Sven Larson, research fellow with the Wyoming Liberty Group, explains.
A lot more of the taxes that we pay go to these programs, and so that becomes the concern of politicians. All our focus is drawn to these programs instead of the core issues of government.
That political focus can be seen in two ways during this year's budget debate. First are the hundreds of people who came to a recent public comment period on the budget. Many of them lined up at the microphones, hat in hand, asking for the state to pay for all kinds of social programs. The politicians on the stage and Speaker of the House Joe Hackney are only talking about changing $660 million in state spending. Second is the governor. She also has her hat in her hand trying to get money for her NC Mobility Fund. She wants the money to spend on critical transportation projects like the Yadkin River Bridge.
We've got to stretch every single penny. You have to find creative ways to fund our infrastructure.
Governor Perdue is trying against all odds to raise fees on drivers and wrestle $22 million out of the general fund. That's only 0.04% of the state's budget. The state treasurer says North Carolina can't borrow any more money, and a quick check of the U.S. debt clock shows America is $13 trillion in hock, and some say nearing a tipping point. Legislators' goal is to approve a new budget before the current fiscal year ends on June 30th. For CarolinaJournal.tv, I'm Anthony Greco.